and explores innovative strategies and architectural practice in response. He has taught at Pratt Graduate School of Architecture, New School at RPI. He is registered as an architect in New York State and Turkey. Welcome, sir. And now we invite you to present your talk.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Great. I just want to first thank to the Student Council of Academy of Architecture for inviting me, and thank you all for your time. It is 11 p.m. in New York now, so during the talk, if I am incoherent, I'm sorry, it's late at night, but I will try my best. As mentioned, I'm originally from Turkey, and I moved to the United States in 1998 to study at UCLA in Los Angeles, and to move to New York City in 2004. And it is in New York City that I started my own practice, Bureau Koray Duman, or BKD, in 2023. I maybe just want to first briefly mention some of the original interests that I have in architecture. You see here the image of Anthony Widler on the left. I was fortunate enough to study with him when I was at UCLA. He was my thesis advisor. He's a renowned architecture historian. And as an architecture historian, beginning in the 60s, he reshaped his field with an interdisciplinary approach, borrowing from psychoanalysis, French literary theory, and cultural studies. Among his concerns was the dissolution of modern society and the hope and the anxiety-inducing alienation people feel in what pass for public spaces today. What really fascinated me about him was that he held out hope that as society became more obsessed with spectacle and image, architecture might take a bigger role in shaping it for better. He was also somebody who introduced me a lot of the 1960s and 1970s art and urban design movements, including Situationist International. The two maps you see on the left were produced by them depicting Paris. And what was really fascinating about Situationist International and some of the other groups in the 1960s was that Situationist International was an international organization of social revolutionaries made up of avant-garde artists, intellectuals, and urban theorists. They believed the advanced modern society's focus on individual expression through the exchange or consumption of commodities had far-reaching damage to the quality of human life for both individual and society. Their work concentrated on directly lived experience and ideas on the liberation of everyday life. The social thinkers, artists, and architects of this period were experimenting on cities, mainly in public spaces. Their work wanted to interrupt the overly prescribed everyday life and to open up possibilities. This is the main image that you see in our website if you go to our website. And what you will see here is some of the prompts that show some of the main core values of our office. I always love the idea that architecture has the potential to be a social infrastructure that can advance social culture issues and open up possibilities. The very act of designing public and or civic spaces was very exciting. As mentioned in the intro, our practice, BKD, is a research-driven architecture and design studio based in New York City and Istanbul. And most of our projects are in arts and culture and aim to look at producing new types of public spaces. So during this presentation, I just want to walk through with you some of the projects that we did throughout the years. When we first started the office, one of the easiest way to experiment and think about public space is to enter open international competitions. We we entered one of these competitions in 2016. It was for Mali. Mali is the Lima Art Museum in Lima, Peru. The existing building, which you see in front of you, the two-story white building, and the park behind it was designed to house the Lima International Exhibition of 1872. The building later was converted into a museum in 1961. What the competition was asking for is to use the adjacent lot next to the museum to build a new contemporary art wing. The site was in the corner of two very well-known avenues and in a very busy public space. This intersection that you see on the right bottom is one of the busiest intersections in Lima. And the idea of the competition was to extend the museum with a new 6,000 square foot building on this site to house educational programs and contemporary art galleries. In these diagrams, this series of diagrams, you will see the idea that we came up with. On the right, on the left top, what you see is the existing building, and the dotted area is the competition site. It is currently a ward separating the museum entrance and exposition part from the busy corner at the intersection of the two major avenues. The entrance of the current museum is actually facing to the park. In the second diagram that you see here is the area calculation of all the programs. The program requirement was not that much. In fact, the overall program can fit into 2.5-story buildings, and that was actually great because the existing building was 2 stories high, and we didn't want it to, the new addition, to overwhelm the existing building. We want to be respected to it. One of the first things that we thought about is how do we connect the busy corner of this intersection to the museum entrance and to the park. So the initial idea was in the program and message organization was to put the education, hardware, storage, and equipment programs in the basement, sunken 4 meters into the ground, and the galleries are raised 4 meters above ground, leaving the majority of the ground floor open. Leaving the majority of the ground floor open made us to extend the plaza into the park as well as the park into the corner. Lobby is placed on the southeast corner adjacent to the entrance to the existing museum to create a connection between two entrances, while the cafe is placed at the corner, pulling the public into the site and the exhibition park. The galleries above was an elevated box which tilted to provide shade to the entire site. Tall-toothed roof facing north above the galleries provide natural indirect light into the galleries. And finally, we created sunken gardens into the basement so that natural light can go to the classrooms, reading rooms, and workshop in the basement programs. This drawing shows the entire ground floor of the site as well as the park that is adjacent. The new design of the contemporary art wing provides a social landmark, a place for civil engagement, and a new kind of public space. We envision the ground floor as a collage of landscape and pavings where a lot of different types of public programs can happen throughout the day, where the galleries sit above, creating shading for them. What you see here is the floor plans. The one on the left that you see is the ground floor. As you can see, is that the footprint of the museum on the ground floor is very minimal. It's these great sculpture of boxes, which is for the cafe, the multi-purpose room, and the entrance, and the entire space is open to the public as the extension of the park. The second image in the middle that you see is the second floor, which is the elevated gallery box, which provides unobstructed spaces for contemporary art exhibition. And the one that you see on the right is the basement space that has the art storage as well as the classrooms and the education spaces, where sunken gardens provide lighting to the classrooms and educational programs. The final design that we have here, as you can see, is the view is shown from the busy corner. And on the left, you see the existing museum. And on the right, you see our new addition, where you can see the elevated gallery box and the public space extended underneath it towards the park and the entrance of the museum. This other view that you see is one of the gallery spaces where you see the southwood roofing that is positioned directly towards true north to bring indirect light into the gallery spaces. Another competition that we did was part of European 13 in 2015. The theme of European 13 was Adaptable City. The particular site that you see is in Uusikaupunki, Finland, and the site had an emphasis on densifying 1960s housing area. The site that you see in the slide that was given to us is marked with the white outline. It's actually two sites that are interrupted by a continuous road. So it's two heady corner sites that were proposed for this competition. And the site is adjacent to the University of Uusikaupunki in the student village and commercial center. Our initial idea was not to see these two sites as two separate sites, but as a continuous site. And in order to do that, we thought to think about this project almost as a superstructure. The images that you see are the study models for the project. The project is called EcoLoop. The EcoLoop is a superstructure that blurs the boundaries between building and landscape, figure ground, production and consumption to create an ecosystem that is greater than some of its parts. I will maybe explain more here on this rendering. The project starts on one side at the ground floor as a big landscape that lifts up. And as the landscape goes higher and higher, it becomes the roof garden above the entire building. It's at the middle of the site, it turns into a bridge that goes above the road to create this continuous superstructure. The way the project works is explained in these diagrams. The program for the project was to provide dormitory for students, housing for elderly, as well as a restaurant and public spaces in the ground floor, and educational programs for the study areas for the students. The way the program works is that we place the family residence, which is for the elderly, in the lower volume on the bottom part of the structure, as well as at the end of the taller part of on the other side. The darker gray area you see on this diagram on the upper left is for occupied by students. The way the project works is that the entire roof is a continuous park where you can access individuals flows through these roof terrace. It also provides a cycling path through the roof to each floor, as well as provides green roof space. That is the idea for that is that can actually provide spaces produced to products for the restaurant and the urban bar market that is underground. This was the final project for this competition for our proposal. And these are two views that shows the project. The top view is on the street level. You can see that the superstructure goes over the street, and the area that is the bridge is where is the study area for the student. And the higher portion that you see in front of us on the right is where the elderly housing is occupied. The bottom view that you see here shows the continuous roof that people can walk through into their apartments in each floor, as well as the greenhouses that will produce the products for the restaurant and the urban market below. There is also the idea that the university was thinking about where if we were to put elderly housing with student housing, it might help in two ways. One of them is in Finland, in Scandinavian countries now, they do multi-generational housing where the students take care of the elderly and make income from it, while they also learn from the experience of the elderly. So the university was looking at combination of this multi-generational living that would really help both generations. We spent the first few years of our studio to do these kind of competitions. But one thing that we realized soon enough is that there were certain issues to do open international competitions. The main problems there was that you never have a chance to visit the site. You don't have direct, intimate relationship with the communities, and you don't really have direct also relationship with the institution that's doing the competition. Even though these projects were really great way of thinking about public spaces and having formal studies to develop ideas, we also find out that it also has its own limitations. This was during the time of 2015 and 2016. Another thing that we also realized during this time was that we realized that the kind of the promises that was given to us in early 2000s about internet and the possibility of internet was starting to kind of dissolve. And that started us to think about is really doing competitions was kind of a way of practicing new ideas. During that time, we also started some research about where really our culture is thinking about physical public space and digital world. Some of the things that we found in 2016 was really interesting. One of the things that we find during that time was an average American adult spends 54 minutes a day commuting, more than 11 hours a day staring at screens. They usually have 1.4 friends and 338 Facebook friends. Another thing that we find thinking about what was happening in the world was that another interesting thing that we find is that this again, statistics from America, but American adults spend about 5.6 hours per day on images browsing. And during this period, we also realized that people can browse about 1,500 images per hour, and they browse approximately 8,600 per day. So some of the problems that we realize about doing architecture in a global world, in practicing in different places and doing projects for sites that we don't really familiar with, was that we realized that we are actually becoming a part of this culture. What we are doing was really not working on physical public spaces, but really producing images for digital world and for social media. This was also during a time, interesting enough, that was around the 2016 United States election. We also realized how fragile our democracy has become. Around the time of 2016 elections and afterwards, we witnessed the limits of the internet's transparency, its horizontality and so-called non-hierarchical and non-mediated structure, as well as its threat of elements of democracy. We have realized the limitations of echo chambers that we all have been living in, the noise of mainstream media coverage, sensational storytelling, and the social media feeds that reverberate within closed systems. That really shifted the way we wanted to work in our office. Another thing that really resonated with me during this time was a biennial that I was invited to participate. In 2017, I was invited to take part in Sharjah Art Biennial 14 by one of the three creators of the biennial. His name was Omar Khalid. Even though the exhibition opened on March 2019, we spent 2017 thinking about some of the topics that Ray raised. The biennial's title was called Living the Echo Chamber. It was a thought-provoking experience, and the title itself was also very thought-provoking. My contribution was thinking about how the power of open architecture, a physical space that provides the social infrastructure necessary to promote social exchange, conversation, and the production of raw knowledge, can be a welcome anecdote to the echo chambers of the digital world. Simultaneously, during this time in 2016, we also start to focus our practice towards self-initiated, research-driven projects. We decided that it was more useful for our time to work with nonprofits or communities in New York City, which allow us to better understand needs and potentials of underserved communities and overlooked infrastructure in the city, and how, in fact, physical public spaces can be a nice addition, not an opposition to the digital world, the digital public spaces that we are living. So I want to now show a couple of the self-initiated projects that we did between 2015 and 2018. The first research project that we did was with a nonprofit called American Society for Non-Muslim Advancement. They were a very progressive nonprofit who want to think about what might be a new way of thinking about an Islamic cultural center that will serve for American Muslim society. We started the research with them to look at what is the existing condition. Most of the Islamic cultural centers in the United States, especially around New York City, were actually current mosques. They were not cultural centers. And we realized that there's a difference between religious as practice and religious as culture. If a mosque is a place that try to be also a cultural center, you also realize its limitations. Because religion as practice aims to be more repetitive and timeless. It doesn't really think about progress in culture and current cultural and social and economical issues. It also tends to be more exclusive, and most of these spaces were mostly for men, excluding a different specific geographical place, immigrants from a specific geographical place. There was no cultural space, cultural center that provide them for the necessary educational program. People didn't want a space where there's a new, unique American Muslim identity that also can flourish and extend beyond these individual groups and can add much more cultural and social services that the community needed. One of the things that we did was we also looked at some historical examples. One of the examples that we found really fascinating was the Külliye structures in old Selçuk and Ottoman empires. Külliye is a complex that is usually used to build new neighborhoods in old cities. People usually know the mosque, that's the most famous part of the Külliye, but the Külliye is a big infrastructure where there's a series of other programs that are attached around the mosque that provides public kitchen, hospital, bathhouses, schools, and even many other public programs that the neighborhood needed. This was really fascinating for us to look at. One, of course, issue about these structures was they were very horizontal. And the project that we want to build is in New York City, where space is scarce. As we were walking through this, one idea that came was what if we actually turn this horizontal structure into a vertical structure? The way Külliye's work is that each of the buildings is connected with each other through streets. If we were to take these programs and put them on top of each other and maybe create a vertical street that goes around them, that might be a way of introducing a new kind of public space in New York City. Another thing that we did with this nonprofit is that we really look at what kind of programs that they needed. It varied tremendously. They were looking at, of course, educational programs where they needed nursery, preschool areas, classrooms, lecture halls, another auditorium. They really needed recreational spaces that include dance studios, yoga studios, martial arts, gym, fitness areas. But they also were looking for places like a culinary area where there will be a restaurant and a cafe, as well as cooking, a place for cooking classes, as well as art, culture, and social programs, which provide contemporary art spaces, exhibition spaces, as well as auditoriums and permanent galleries. We divided these spaces into two, the informal spaces and the formal spaces. The informal spaces are more the public spaces where people can wander around. These are the spaces that probably will include cafe, restaurant, retail, exhibition, or the library. Whereas formal spaces are more defined spaces that are for specifically one program. And these will include the athletic facilities, classrooms, offices, and so on. And the idea was that we stack the formal programs on top of each other. And the informal programs start carving around them as what we call this vertical public space, this public informal street. And the way it works is that the more public programs that will be used more often and more informally will be towards the bottom, like dining, lunch, retail, lobby. As you go towards the vertically above, you will have less informal and more designated spaces where people can use elevators to go into, whereas spaces, more informal spaces like auditorium, again, library, lunch, dining will be more closer to the ground level and will be connected to the to this public informal space. And the idea here was really, how can we create a new kind of public space that will provide people to wander around, discover new things, as well as discover chance meetings with other fellows that might be coming from other parts of the world, but they are also share common religion with you. This is the final project, the model for the final project. You can really see this informal space that wraps around the building and the transparency around it that really shows the extension of the public into this vertical space. And this is a detail of this informal public space that wraps around the inner walls. Second project that we did was called Under the BQU. BQU stands for Brooklyn Expressway. One of the things that we realize in New York City, which probably is common in a lot of other big cities, is New York City has 300 miles of elevated infrastructure. And this elevated infrastructure is usually for highway or subway lines. The ground floor space above this elevated infrastructure is usually used for parking or it's no man's land. And one interesting thing about this elevated infrastructure, even though people can walk underneath it, these also divided neighborhoods. We realized that these elevated, the space underneath this elevated infrastructures has a lot of potentials, and that they were really overlooked public spaces. What we want to do is that we want to take one portion of it and do a test element. BQU, Brooklyn Queen Expressway, where it goes through in Brooklyn is the widest in its length. And what we thought would be really interesting is to pick up a site that was next to a big complex. The blue area that you see here is called Industrial City. It is next to the original industrial pier of New York City, where all the goods of the New York City would arrive. And this huge complex was built to store all the goods that were coming with ships. They were stored in these buildings, and this freeway that was built was an easy way for the goods to be distributed to other parts of New York City. Of course, in the 30s and 40s, the harbor relocated from here to Jersey, and this part of the town was left and underused. In the 70s and 80s, artists started to invade these buildings to use them as studio spaces. Interesting enough, it turned these spaces into where now it's really, buildings are used a lot for creative industries. There's a lot of designers, artists, digital production, manufacturing places. And one of the ideas that we had was that, can we take a portion of under the freeway here and take a look at what might be the potentials for that? Two things came to our mind in this project. One of them is, what if we actually use this area for underneath the freeway for commercial kitchens and parking for food trucks? The idea came about because the freeway itself really is a very quick way to transfer from or connect to any part of New York City. That will be really a great thing for food trucks. And that is the fact that being underneath the freeway, a program like Commercial Kitchen might be really suitable. Another program that we really looked at here in this neighborhood was, what if we actually use it as a sports and recreational area? So the project evolved as two options that we provided for the industrial city complex. One of them was to think about a floor plane that provides parking for food trucks as well as areas for commercial kitchens. The idea for commercial kitchens was that during the morning they will produce food for the food trucks, and when the food trucks leave to go to their destination during the day, the area that was for parking for food trucks can turn into public space, and then people who work around in the complex can come to have lunch, so it has this double purpose. The second project that we looked at was this as a sports complex. But if we provide a gym and basketball, football areas for the neighborhood, that actually can be really useful in two ways. One of them is it can be used by schools during the day, but at lunchtime, in the morning and in the evening, it can be used by the people in the complex. And when we were looking at these, we also want to think about what are the different formal experiments that we can do that will help us to also think about new kind of public spaces. What you see here is the final rendering for the commercial kitchens and food truck. There's actually two planes in this proposal. One of them is the ground plane. The ground plane folds up and creates commercial kitchens, and also when it comes down, creates the public space and greenery. There's also another plane that is above it that folds and creates a roof structure that creates a a sound barrier that comes from the freeway. For the second proposal, we also were looking about the idea of a sport facility. One thing that we realized about sport facilities is that if you do high intensive workout, actually because of the heat that you produce, you don't need to be in a conditioned environment, except it's really cold, which is 2 months of the year. Besides those, you can, if you have a covered shed above you, you don't really need to have if you want to play basketball, tennis, or if you want to do high intensity workout, you don't really need an enclosed space. One of the ideas is that what if we actually create areas that are open most of the time, but it is also has these inflatable structures. So when it's really cold, these inflatable structures create heating, but otherwise it will be just open spaces for people to do their workout. And there are other volumes that are more enclosed permanently that are for changing rooms and cafeteria, and also more small workout areas. And the last thing that I want to show in this research projects is another thing that we looked at was the scaffoldings in New York City. In 2016, we did this experiment. I sent 2 interns from my office to measure all the scaffoldings around our office in 5 blocks by 5 blocks area. What we realized is that almost 20 to 25% of sidewalks were covered with scaffolding. Scaffoldings are a big part of everyday life and public space in New York City. The question that we really had was that if this is such a big part of our everyday life and our public space, it doesn't really, it can't just be for only safety. It should be used for other things. It has the potential to be used for other things. So this research project that we did about scaffoldings was, how can we think about scaffoldings? A, they are structurally more efficient, but B, they can also really help to create vibrant public spaces and serve to the public in other ways other than safety. So on the left that you see is standard scaffolding coding. They are very primitive structures. They are made out of posts. They are modular, of course, and they are easy to be erectable and removed, assembled and reassembled quickly. There are some regulations around it codes. But one thing that we also realized in New York City is that the scaffoldings are not only used for new construction, they are also used to inspect facade of old buildings, and facades of old buildings in New York City needs to be inspected every 7 years. And that's the reason why there's so much scaffolding in New York City. And sometimes these scaffoldings can't stay more than a year or so in the sidewalk. So some of the things that we start thinking about is that if we have to look at scaffolding, what are the other elements that we can put into them? Can we provide landscaping, urban furniture? Can we provide bike racks or trash cans or even newspaper stands or food vendors? So the project that I'm going to show now is 2 options that look the alternatives that we can think about for scaffold. Some of the sketch that we did was, what if we actually just use them as diagonals so that it will be much more efficient than the simple column and beam structure that we have. But at the same time, these diagonals can start hold some public furniture. Or what if these are collapsible structures that doesn't really need to be individual elements, but they come as sections that can be unfold or fold back again quickly so that the assembly and disassembly time of them can be reduced. So the first option that you see here was the option for the diagonal elements. Here you can see how plug-in benches or bike racks or stands can be incorporated into the scaffolding to make it more of a public space for the city dwellers. This is a view of the same one from the sidewalk. And the other option is, what if it was these collapsible structures that really get support from the center, but it also can be attached to the buildings or have secondary support on the sides. And with these structures, another option that we had beside benches or bike racks, that what if we also start thinking about plugins that can be used, paper stands or other type of projects. The one interesting about all of these projects is that it started to give some recognition of the office. So we start getting invitation to propose temporary public installations in New York City. So this led us to start thinking about much more smaller projects as well. But another thing that I want to briefly maybe mention is that we do actually ends up really useful for the projects that we do, the build projects that we do in the office. This is a very small project that we did in 2017, right after that research that we did about it. It is for a creative agency. This creative agency has a very small floor space. It is 1,000 square foot, which I believe is less than 100 meters square. And they had a lot of needs that they wanted to fit in. They wanted to have 12 desk space for 12 people, a private meeting room, a kitchenette, and a secondary kind of informal meeting area. What we thought is that maybe what you see here is the plan, which is a long rectangle with windows on one side and door on the other side. What we thought is that maybe we can tuck the meeting room on the entrance corner, and the irregular extension or widening on the bottom right can turn into the kitchenette and the informal meeting area, which allow us to leave a more rectangular space for the work area. The area that was left over was not long enough, but wide enough that rather than having a big long table, we thought that maybe a zigzag table might work better. It fits to the space, but it also makes it longer. And then we introduced two ideas here. One of them is that they, as a creative agency, didn't want to have a lot of clutter. So the main space actually have curtains that if they want to, they can block all the visual clutter, the meeting room and the kitchenette area, and just have the main space. And when they want, the curtains can move and they can, be a whole open space. The other idea that we had was the desk for the space was going to be so big that what if we use scaffolding poles to float this table so that it just looks more ephemeral and light. The images of the final space, and these scaffolding poles actually not only structure but the electric goes through them into the middle, so that any electronic equipment that you have on the table can have access to plug-in. The other kind of things that we started thinking about after the scaffolding was this idea of modular structure that's almost like an infrastructure that wraps around, that can be used for various different things. One project during that time we had was also another that was a cafe in downtown spaces. They want to extend this and be fit into different places. The other idea about the modularity was that this modular structure can also be adapted to different things that they want. It can be used for lighting, planting, but at the same time for merchandising, as well as other programs like storage and pickup. This is the floor plan. This structure was installed in an existing space. It's a grid, as you can see, a modular grid, 3D Tetris that starts at the wall on the left, where you can pick up your food or there's display and storage. But it goes over you and comes down as a folding table for sugar or cups or utensils. This is the infrastructure, this 3D lattice infrastructure that we inserted in the existing space. This idea of a structure that wraps around you, that can be modular and can be used for different things, that kind of envelopes you as a social infrastructure, even though in a small scale was something that really was interesting to think about after some of the bigger projects that we did. So these are some detailed images, final images of that project, and these are other images. It's again, I think in 2017, we were invited for to do a public installation in Flatiron district of New York City. We were invited by Flatiron Business District. This is a project that they invite designers to do proposals every year. The installation goes from Thanksgiving to New Year's, and that's the holiday season in the United States. And it's really an installation that wants to activate the public space and bring some joy during the holiday season. This is the triangular site for the space. It is intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway and 23rd Street. All of them are main streets, and this triangular area in between is again almost like a no man's land that the business district asked us to propose the installation. What we were really interested in this idea that the design has the power to create a sense of belonging, joy, and ownership of public space. A design that provides a sense of familiarity between strangers in public while being playful is the core of this proposal. So what we proposed here is a big rock chair. It's a big cedar top, and we call it the Flatiron rock chair. Flatiron rock chair is a large-scale public rocking chair during the day. As passersby enter and sit down, the piece rocks up and down, animating the holiday spirit. At night, in a fixed upright position, the piece transforms into a stage where festive chorus will perform. The design aims for the neighborhood to visit the rock chair regularly, to enjoy the movement during daytime, to listen to a program of chorus at night, and for the piece to create a community around it throughout the holiday season. And this is a little animation we did for the project. The next installation was also another installation that we were invited by the Times Square's Arts Council. They do this yearly also. Every year in February, they invite a couple of architects to propose a temporary installation during February. And the idea is that to really celebrate Valentine's Day. This was a very interesting project, and the design itself is something very dear to our office. But I want to first show, this is Times Square. It's literally in the middle of Times Square. It's again in the crossing. We thought a lot about this project, and what it means to love was something that we thought a lot. And one thing that was really important was that our office is composed of first-generation immigrants. To love as an immigrant requires to belong, and belonging drives from expression, recognition, and ownership. The design is a gesture for belonging. Times Square is both an intersection of major streets of Manhattan and the crossroads of the world. The form and the function of the design highlights these qualities. The installation is comprised of two 22 feet length and 11 feet height walls, intersecting in the middle at 90 degrees. The center of both walls has a heart-shaped cutout, creating 4 intersections with a heart shape in the middle. Either side of both walls are covered with a skin of reversible screens. One side of the skin is finished with brushed metal and the other a mirrored red metal. As visitors brush their hands over the screens flip from one side to the other, creating an interactive wall. Well, it allows people to write words on both sides of the heart. The design invites visitors to express their love, ranging from names of loved ones to the statements of passion. This is the detail of the project where both sides, as we talked about, is covered with the sequence. As you brush through your hand, the color changes, the screens change so that you can, so that it becomes an interactive wall. These are the renderings of the same structure. The last installation project that I want to show is actually something that was brought to us by Finnish Cultural Institute, New York. It was their 50th anniversary, and they want to celebrate it with a public installation. One thing that they were looking at two things. One of them is that they really want to celebrate diversity of New York City, but at the same time, they want to look at similarities between big major cities that are built around waterfront. One thing interesting, is that Istanbul in Turkey or Helsinki in Finland, both of them are waterfront cities, and they have been waterfront cities with public spaces that were on waterfront for centuries. The thing that's different in New York City is that New York City's relationship to water till mid-20th century was only commerce. So most of the public spaces you think about in New York City were always inside the island. It was in the 80s, 90s, and mostly in 2000 and 2010s that New York City really developed the edges of Manhattan and Brooklyn to turn into major public spaces. So one of the things that we really want to do is that to look at how we can look at Istanbul and Helsinki and how we can introduce new ways for people to be in public space and socialize around water. Some of the things that we were really interested in this idea of socializing around water in Finnish culture around saunas and in Turkish culture in hammams, and how these spaces are really public communal spaces that are really also spaces of detox that really help you to kind of find a moment in the busy city life to relax and to kind of envelope yourself with something other than the busy street life. Our proposal was actually at Pier 36 in Manhattan, and the idea for the project is actually to create a floating pavilion. The pavilion itself is made out of two L-shaped walls, U-shaped walls. One wall, as you enter, one wall brings you into the space, and the main space itself is open to the sky and open to the water underneath. The idea is that people can be within these two spaces, sit and just be able to enjoy a moment of silence with water and sky, and just leave the city behind that. So this is where you see in the plans is the entrance to the main space, and then from the other side you exit. This is the actual proposal. You can see the folding, the entrance wall, and equally the second wall that wraps around it, that encloses and closes the space, but at the same time it provides exit from the pavilion. This is the side view, and this is the bird eye point of view. The space itself, when you enter, all you will see is the sky and the water. But as you come out of it, the road starts to open up, and you start, as you walk out of it, start to see the city and reconnect with the city. The last thing that maybe I will just talk about briefly is that some of these design research projects and these proposals that we did about public space has been going on in our office for almost 10 years now. But of course, we have another side of the office that we do a lot of arts related spaces, galleries, artist studios, design space, creative agencies, as well as exhibition spaces. But the thing that was always kind of interesting and difficult in a way in the first probably 6-7 years of our practice was that these two parts of the office were, even though sometimes they overlapped, they were going distinctive, where the build projects and the research projects not necessarily always talk to each other, where there was no opportunity potentially. So I want to show two recent projects that we are working on. They are both museum projects in New York City, but they start to really think about public spaces in a different way also. The first one that I want to talk about, the Noguchi Museum. The Noguchi Museum is built by Isomi Noguchi, the famous sculptor that was renowned in the 50s, 60s, and 70s about his public sculptures. The site is in Queens, across from Manhattan. And the site itself is actually two sites. One of them, this small rectangle you see, is the original studio of Isomi Noguchi, where he lived and worked. It's the old one-story manufacturing building that he bought in 1960, and he worked there for 20 years. Late in his life, he bought the garage and factory across the street, which is this triangle area, and turned it into a museum. And the museum itself is now independently run after he passed away. In 2017, the museum opened a competition. They owned the two sites next to the studio to extend the campus. For a long time, the studio itself was also closed to the public. The idea is that how we can extend the museum so that we can repurpose the studio and extend it to the new site. But one thing that happened, interesting enough, is that the site is actually very close to the East River. And in 2012, when Sandy happened, the building flooded. And the collection was mostly stored in basements, which is what happens usually in the museums. And right before Sandy, they immediately took out all the collection and they distributed into different warehouses that are an hour away from the city. What they realize is that the museum has a hard time, even though they can have exhibitions and continue their programming, but that they were really detached from the heart of the museum, which is the entire collection. So the competition was to build an art and archive building where they can bring back the collection into the museum again. This is the existing museum, and this rectangle that you see is the existing studio. Our proposal was really to be to kind of respect to the original architecture of the museum and the original architecture of the studio. The museum is very simple. Isomi Noguchi really designed the museum to use readily available materials, CMV, corrugated metal, steel. That was really kind of the simplicity of that, and the way it was, put together was very important to him. We want to keep that in the new proposal. The second thing that we want to do is that the new building that we propose, we didn't want it to kind of look so different or entirely new edition. One of the ideas that we had is that there is this existing brick that is wrapped around the existing studio. We actually extended it on both sides of the building, and we slide our building in between those brick walls so that it felt like it belonged there. This is our final proposal, this corrugated building, and this is the existing studio, and this is the brick wall extending. The top floor is the archive area for education and research center, and the bottom is the storage. And the proposal that we have was to renovate the studio so that it can open up as a multi-purpose space where the cafe and the bookstore will be, but it will be a flexible space that can also be served for other reasons. The interesting thing about this project was that once the museum realized that they are going to have a big building that will be basically a storage, but it can't be hidden away like they used to do in basement. What can we do that to bring new life to this building that can, really work more than just being a storage space in the ground floor? So one of the things that we work with them is that we actually see the ground floor is the entire storage space is actually movable. It's on track so that it can open up to create events or lectures and talks inside the storage space and also bring people within the storage space. The studio itself is also a space where we kept the existing skin of the building, the CMD walls and the steel structure as it is, but introduced these corrugated metal panels that can be used in many different ways so that it's purely flexible. It can have these boxes that can install to show his the lamps and furniture that he designed, but it can also become a space for exhibition, or it can be a public space for the cafe or talks or lectures. And the last project briefly that I want to talk about is MoMA PS1. MoMA PS1 is again a museum in Long Island City, across from Manhattan. PS1 comes from public school. The building itself that you see here was the first public school of Brooklyn. That's why it's called PS1. It was abandoned in the 40s, and in the 60s, artists started to occupy these as studio spaces. They produce work, they exhibit work here. It was really kind of a ground-up guerrilla style exhibition. The city recognizes the power of it, and they give money. And in the 90s, it was renovated into a proper museum. During that time, the back courtyard, what used to be a parking lot, turned into, as you can see, a series of concrete courtyard that the artists and the creators can use to exhibit work in the space. In 2000, it was associated with Museum of Modern Art, so it became an annex of Museum of Modern Art, so it's called MoMA PS1. One thing that they had during the COVID was that the museum realized that they are actually incredibly detached from the neighborhood because of the architecture of it. It was covered with these concrete walls, and people didn't even know, the neighborhood didn't know that there was a museum there. They also felt like when you go inside, it felt like a prison courtyard. The other thing so it was not accessible to the neighborhood, but it was also not accessible to the creators. There was no infrastructure here to activate these public spaces. So during COVID and Black Lives Matter movement, they realized that they need to be a part of the neighborhood. They start doing workshops with the neighborhood. They have protesters for Black Lives Matter to create workshops for them, provide food and water during the marches, but at the same time create programs for them within the courtyard, so that the museum becomes really a part of the neighborhood. And then they hired us to think about how we can even make it more accessible, both for the museum and for the neighborhood. This is the original rendering of the architect from 1997 with these concrete walls. As you can see, it's a very abstract drawing. It almost has no life. It almost doesn't want anybody to be inside it. We did a workshop with the neighborhood and community as well as the museum. And as we start collaging the kind of things that they want to do, to open up the wall, to be able to use the courtyard for different things that they needed lighting, they need projection, they need various of other things. We realized that actually the kind of the thing that really need is to be able to respond to various different things, and this end up being the collage that we created for them. From this collage, we are now currently working on a concept design with the museum. A couple of things that we are doing is that the entrance probably we are turning into a living room for the neighborhood. It will also have a cafe, so this will be almost work detached, separate from the museum, separate operation hours. We will also penetrate this concrete wall, install gates that will open it up during the daytime, but the gates themselves also will be furniture. When it's open, there might be seating or bike racks or tables so that people can occupy it. We also want to start thinking about how the museum can extend beyond its walls and then occupy the public space in front of it with more opportunities for seating, bike racks, also for public spaces. This is the current scheme that we are working on with the museum that kind of really tries to activate the space. One of the things we're also doing is that we are providing a bespoke metal cap above the concrete walls that will be custom designed so that they can install hooks to it for shading during the summer, but it will also provide electric for lighting or projector. The piece itself, it's very surgical, very small, but it will be allow the creators to install the projector so they can provide screening or all types of other things, so that this the courtyard and the front pavilion and the space in front of it really starts to belong both to the museum and the courtyard. This is kind of all the projects that we had that I want to introduce here. Thank you so much for your time. I hope I didn't go above my time, but happy to answer some of the questions you have. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for the presentation. I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions from the auditorium and the studio.
Krishna.
Yeah, so thank you for the very insightful talk. It was lovely to look into all those wonderful work that you have been doing in New York and around. So my question is, so can developing a sustainable, self-sufficient urban realm facilitate ownership and inclusivity among people themselves? Hello, did you hear me?
I hear the first part of the question, but if you can repeat it again, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. My question was, can developing...
Hello. Can developing a sustainable, self-sufficient urban realm itself facilitate ownership and inclusivity among people themselves?
How to create? Is the question is how to create a?
So this question was in reference to your project EcoLoop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'll repeat the question. Can developing a sustainable, self-sufficient urban realm facilitate ownership and inclusivity among people?
I mean, that's the hope. I think a couple of things that's really important. I think we need to create some synergies through architecture between different types of people. In that project, we were really trying to create this synergy between different age groups so that you can start to go beyond your comfort zone and start interacting with other people and see other points of view and start to support each other. The other thing there that we were hoping was that the project was really trying to also help students financially, so the students can either help the elderly with their everyday life with simple things, but also can work on these greenhouses or gardens in the roofs to help for the restaurant and the marketplace, but also to work on the restaurant and the marketplace that will help them to, to kind of offset their living expenses. The roof terrace or the garden itself won't produce the entire thing that was needed for the restaurant and the market, but it was a start for them to think about a potential for them to produce a certain percentage. But we are hoping that it will be a self-sustaining in certain ways a project.
Questions?
So my question is, is it necessary to always make a bold and standing out statement when you're doing a project?
Not maybe for the individual projects, but I think it's always good to have an underlying. I mean, you should always think about your underlying passion when you are working on projects. In architecture practice, you can easily code up with the everyday challenges or problems of projects, and if you don't have a in your background something that constantly reminds you why you are doing what you are doing and why you are passionate about it, you can easily be distracted with the stresses of everyday architecture practice issues. So I do think that it's important. It is important to have an overall underlying idea. And even though sometimes the project ends up in some place than your initial ideas, those ideas always stay in the office, whether with study models, drawing schedules, or behind your mind, and it will always come up with different ways in other projects. So yeah, definitely.
Hi, sir. So I wanted to ask what your thoughts are on what contemporary means in today's day as a designer.
Contemporary what? I'm sorry, contemporary?
So contemporary architecture in today's day as a designer, what does that mean?
I mean, I think a part of the, and I hope I won't repeat myself, but one thing that I think a lot, and this also relates to COVID, when we isolated a lot during COVID, and we are just again starting to come back to socialize with each other in physical spaces. One thing that I really think that in architecture we really need to think about is that, what we do as architects is bringing people together in physical spaces. And one thing about physical spaces, if it's a public space, is that it's unmediated. There's a potential that you can meet with people from different parts of the society or with people who have different points of views. One thing that was really, I started to feel very worried during COVID is that how we start having these lives in digital world where our public presence is very mediated, that we should talk and interact with people constantly that have the same point of views, that constantly within the same echo chambers that we have. So I think in contemporary architecture, something that we should really think about is that how our profession can bring different parts of the society together in physical spaces, and how we can kind of instigate random conversations for people to face different points of view. Those kind of ideas I find it very relevant nowadays, and I think that's something that we should really think more and more in our current life and practice.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. It is late at night in New York, so thank you for staying up for us. I had a question about the projects you've shown us, because especially the work you've done in New York below the flyovers and the scaffoldings, etc. So apart from the usual, say, spatial and programmatic studies, do you have any formal way of actually engaging with the communities to see how they can add or contribute to what you suggest?
Yeah, so under the BQ project that we did under the elevated freeway, that was specifically done with the management, the developers of the industrial city complex. So that was a very limited relationship or conversation with the community. But during our study with Urban Canopy, we did work with different business districts in New York City where storefront business owners or communities, we did have a series of workshops and interviews with them, thinking about what are the things that they were interested in. So that project is definitely something we involved a lot. The other project that we involved a lot with the community was the PS1 Museum. There, in the beginning of the project, we had a series of conversations both with the staff of the museum and the neighborhood and the community around, which was organized through the museum.
Krish, I think you can take it over from here. And there aren't any questions from the auditorium or studios.
Your voice is not audible.
Just a second. Sharvil has one question.
Yes.
Hi, sir. So, are disruptions a creation of new knowledge?
Absolutely, yeah. And that should be one of the protagonists of doing work in public space. I think sometimes, there's this very famous saying that the fish doesn't know that it's covered with water unless when it jumps out of water. So in a way, is there a way that we think about our design and the power of design to make people jump out of the kind of environment that are in within themselves and try to find ways to give them different points of view?
I think so. We are done with questions from the auditorium and studios. Krish, you can take it over.
Yeah, I have one question. So apart from like the other projects, I was really fascinated by the scaffolding project that you had showed us. The variations and different ways in which you treated the scaffolding in a public space. So I would like to ask, in reference to that project, what sort of collaboration and amongst the stakeholders did you have in that ideating that project?
So interesting. So some of these projects were thought-provoking. That was really important to put out there in the world. One thing that I want to mention is that, interesting enough, Department of Buildings in New York City 3 months ago opened up a new requests for proposals, what we call, and invited 6 teams to folding, and we were one of the teams that we interviewed. They haven't announced who they want to work with, but I think a part of the process for the city was when they see these kind of thought-provoking projects, they make them kind of step back and be like, oh, actually, there's a potential for these things that are in front of us that we never think about. So these kind of research projects can have potentials for cities or governments or even institutions to start thinking about other ways of doing things. So that's something that really was really important for that project. The collaborations that we did in scaffolding was, of course, we have few consultants that help us. We had a structural engineer who was, who worked a lot with scaffoldings. As I mentioned, we worked with, in New York City, different neighborhoods have business district co-ops. We worked with 4 of those different neighborhood business districts with the co-ops that allow us to interview with the storefronts and also community members to kind of think about what might be their needs about scaffolding. So those were the stakeholders that we did a series of interviews and workshops before we start the design.
So one more question. In the current architectural landscape of India, where do you see the most significant opportunities for disruptions? And how can you young architects actively contribute to this evolution, particularly in India?
That's I don't want to overestimate because my knowledge will be limited. But one thing that I do, there are 2 things that I want to say. One of them is, as young architects, I really want you to think about how you can shape the practice differently. The traditional way of architecture practice runs is that you have clients and you wait for a client to come and give you a project. And that, of course, is how you sustain yourself. But there are other ways that while doing that, or also teaching, or other ways to sustain yourself, I think you really need to think about the potentials of the education that you had. I think one of the strengths of design thinking is that we see potentials in where other people see problems. So the idea to kind of wait for clients to bring you projects is, I think, something that's outdated. As young professionals coming out of school, you should really think about what are your values and how you can create projects that adapt to those values is a really important question. It also is really important at this time to think about it, because if you were to continue working on a system where you are looking for a traditional client, you would realize that most of your clients are people that have power because they have money. They are the ones who come with projects. Whereas you have the opportunity to go beyond people who hold the power and to help other parts of the community with your design thinking and to find a way to rephrase their problems as potentials. So that's something that I would be, really encouraged to think about. India is the largest country in the world now. There is, and you have a lot of issues, especially in urban. My interest is always in urban areas, so that's one thing that I would think about, is that I'm sure in this dense urban environments with a lot of economical, social inequalities, and what probably problems. As young designers, you will have a great way of looking at these environments and think about them in different them, to work with people to create opportunities. So I think that's something that I would really suggest you to look at, and kind of try to find ways to really bring your values into the cities, into the urban fabric.
So we have one more question from the auditorium.
Hi. So my question deals with how do you suspect the human behavior within the urban realm, and this has two sub questions in it. How do you decide the program for a particular site in case of urban realm or urban spaces? And the second is, do you sometimes fear about your project's reality might not turn into the way that you have imagined to be? Was I audible?
I will answer the second one. I'll answer the second one, of course. I mean, I think in projects, you never, once a project is built, you never have control over it. I mean, the best thing you assume is that people use it in all kinds of different ways that you ever imagined to be used. I think that will be exciting, but it happens. I think it happens a lot. I think a part of our creative thinking is the way we are optimistic, and we are sometimes dreamers that can be dangerous. And absolutely, there are times that you build a project that might not really, for these reasons, doesn't work the way you expected. Again, as I said, might be really surprising, and hopefully it will be a good surprise, and it will be used in various different ways. And in a way, that's why sometimes to think about architecture as a social infrastructure where it's not too prescriptive, it gives you the tools to the users, but it just allows them to do whatever they want to, is the kind of ideal balance that I would hope that I can achieve in my projects. So that's the second, I guess, the answer for the second one. The first one, I'm not sure if you can repeat the first question again.
So basically, what is your methodology for having the program done for the urban realm?
It depends on the project. I mean, again, for example, for the Islamic Culture Center, it was a series of meetings that we had with the client, which was non-profit, the staff of the non-profit, the executive board, and that really provided us with the program. In something like the elevated, under the elevated highway, it was the site analysis, see what kind of programs were around the site that really can help create a project that serves the community around it or the programs around it. So a kind of a site analysis also is very helpful. In the other project, it is mostly, defined interviews as well as site analysis.
Thank you so much.
I maybe mention one more thing about that. I mean, the projects that I show you are so very different scales. A project that is a more of a building like Islamic Culture Center have a lot of programs that you need to really have a series of conversations and interviews with the client. But something like a temporary installation is a very different animal. A temporary installation sometimes really comes from the instinct emotions that come out within the studio between people, the designers that's discussing and their site analysis and how they want to respond to a concept. So I think the way different scale projects, the way the program or the idea comes can differ a lot. That's, yeah, I would say.
So we have one last question.
So we read that you try to stage at least one moment that is out of the box, and you add that it makes one realize the true value of design. Why do you think so? And what exactly does this out of the box moment add to the design?
I mean, in every project, there's not every project, I would say, but you hope that there's in each project there's out of box thinking. I mean, the one thing that came to my mind is the maybe talk about Times Square Valentine's installation. I think a lot of that's a project that for 3 years it has been done, and you see installations in February. Most of the projects that has been done were more Instagram moments where there's some sort of a sculpture, heart shape that people kind of take pictures around it for their Instagram, and we really wanted to think about like what love means, and out of box thinking was maybe to think about love equals belonging, and the idea is that how we belong to a city, not just a romantic love, but how do you love and belong in a city and a society, and what it means was kind of led us to think about maybe a little bit of out of the box response, where making a statement, being able to express yourself in public may be an act of love. And then that kind of led us to go beyond. I mean, the project that we, of course, proposed was a very Instagrammable project for people to take pictures. But at the same time, that allowed us to them to physically engage with the installation and think about, in a way, love is a statement, an act of statement. And I think that probably was out of box thinking there.
Yes. So we will be ending with the questions here. Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for an insightful presentation. And just a minute. Yeah. Thank you so much for the. Sorry. Thank you again for the insightful presentation and the answers for the questions that the students had.
Thank you so much for listening. And I'm sorry I might not be as fluent as I would have been if it was during the day. So forgive me if certain things are not clear, as it's past midnight here. But I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for your time.
Yes. Also, we hope that you visit us soon in India here, and we could take you around.
Well, I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Hello. We request everyone to stay in the auditorium for a while. Till then, Mahir and Sanskar would be explaining you the schedule for the next day.
Yeah, Krish, we'll handle it from here. Thanks. Sir.